Hey everyone, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to convert nulls to options in F# with Option.ofObj. So nulls are the billion-dollar mistake and a common source of problems in many systems. They break because code assumes something is non-null, but in reality it can be null, and yet the technology doesn't surface this info. Thus an implicit case unhandled and leading to breakages. And we see this all the time in like more dynamic languages like JavaScript, Python, where it's very common for things to be nulls, or in JavaScript land even undefined, is maybe even more heinous, even more insidious when we have kind of like a type system that is supposed to have good types, like C# was like this for a long time, where it says it's a string, or it says it's like my type or something, but actually all of that boils down to object, which itself is nullable. And then so you think you have this thing, but actually it's null. And so it feels safe, but actually is unsafe. So very common problem throughout software, and still plagues a lot of, the major programming languages that are used today. Now, F# tries to solve for this by making these nulls explicit. Values can be options, meaning it's either something, some, or nothing, none. This, coupled with F#'s exhaustive pattern matching, helps make this implicit case explicit. You must handle both some and none cases. And if you're not familiar with F#, this is very similar to Rust's match statement, which a lot of people really like because it forces you to deal with, is this something or is this nothing? You can't just have something that's both implicitly. Now, despite this design choice, there are still many ways that nulls may enter your system. Usually at the edges where we interface with other systems like network requests, DB calls, or calls into other languages like C#. Because, these things are happening outside of our type system, outside of our controlled core, and thus it's kind of unsafe chaos out there. People can send us whatever they want, and we still have to deal with it. And so in this post, we're going to explore an easy method for converting these nulls into options to make this common task a bit less tedious and hopefully keep your core system a little bit more sane. All right, converting nulls to options. So we want to convert nulls to options because it makes the fact that this thing could be none explicit and allows the F# type system to help us out in catching these cases. It can help us out because F# will know that it's still an option, and so it's like, hey, you need to check if this is none or some. And obviously you can unsafely unwrap if that's your thing, but usually you'll actually check both cases because obviously if it's that type, that it could be either one. Now, a naive approach to this, and really what I've been doing for a long time, is to write your own converter with a simple match statement. And so if you have this like maybe null value, you can just say, hey, match this with this, and when it's null, then just make it a none, and when it's not null, then we'll just do some v, and now I have an option that plays really well with the F# type system, and so I don't have this thing that I think is something but actually might be null and therefore nothing. And this is very common when, again, like dealing with web requests, like it might be a string or it could be nothing if it's like a value and a URL or like a payload, but also often when dealing with .NET libraries, C# land is still relatively nullable over there. And we're still working on getting the idea of null safe that works in C# kind of into F# to make sure that we aren't passing unsafe nulls from C# types, but we're not there yet. And so this is very, very common in this kind of interface code. And so this works fine, but it can get quite cumbersome if you decide to write it out a lot instead of using a single util function. And this is what I did in my most recent project to get a web request IP address. It works, but it's very verbose. And just to give you an idea of this, you can see that like, oh, I have this thing, it might be a string or it might be null. So then I do a wrap, but then I do it again and again. So it works fine, but it can get quite verbose. Okay, simple null to option with Option.ofObj. Now, luckily, F# includes a helper function to do this for us, and this is Option.ofObj, and you can find this in the official docs here. And this basically does the same thing, just without us writing the match statement ourselves, and it's a nice little simple util, so you can just kind of do a one-line. So you would use it like this, so you have your maybe null value, and then just convert it to an option like this. Shout out to Peter and Ian on Twitter for pointing this out to me. There's a lot of little F# helpers that are really nice to use, but you maybe just don't come across them for a while. And to prove this kind of works to you, I have a replit here using both approaches so you can kind of see how they work and any differences. And so you can see I have this util I wrote myself, which is null to option, which is just doing my, match case directly. And then we have compare methods here, which we'll call with one value, and it will do the null to option and print out what it gets there. And then it'll use the Option.ofObj and print out what it gets here. And then so we're just giving it a null here and a string to kind of show what this does, and I'll run it. And we can see here that when we give it a null value, both of these are returning none, and we give it a non-null value, both of these are returning some. So they are equivalent. And we can even just look at the code here actually for ofobj, and we can see that ofobj is literally just doing that same exact match statement here that we were doing above. Next. So I'm still learning a lot about F# and new ways of doing things. I only build with F# in my free time, so I don't get as much feedback via code reviews and stuff as I do in other languages that I actually use for my job. And so this means like, not noticing this thing in the standard library for many years because, I've never seen someone use it before. Now this has already made my code much simpler, so hopefully you find this useful and it can do the same for yours. Question for you is, how are you dealing with nulls at the edges of your systems? Are there any techniques that you found particularly simple or powerful that you'd like to share? This is kind of how we, find out about things and make our systems better, and we can kind of share better techniques as we go. If you like this post, you might also like F# deserialize JSON with case and sensitive properties using system.text.json. Might also be interested in how to make HTTP requests with an authorization bearer token in F# using FSHTTP, the request library. And finally, you might be interested in build a simple F# web API with Giraffe. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.